Raiders running back Zamir White is the biggest dynasty winner coming out of the 2024 NFL Draft. We'll explain why in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we're going to be breaking down the biggest veteran winners coming out of the 2024 NFL Draft. And we have to start with Zamir White of the Las Vegas Raiders, who did not select a running back in the first 5 rounds of the NFL Draft. Kate, what do we think of Zamir White going into the 2024 season?
Zamir White is a fascinating prospect, right? Coming into the offseason, we knew they wanted to run the ball, and we knew that that was going to be the kind of mentality with their new coaching staff. Like it was going to be ground and pound football. We're going back to the roots of the NFL. And there was like this kind of, like narrative that they wanted a running back by committee. Well, to have a running back by committee, you need multiple capable running backs. So they were one of these teams that heading into the draft was on everybody's radar to take potentially one of these top end running backs like a Trey Benson, like a Jonathan Brooks. Like we knew the need was there because they came right out and said it. Like they didn't commit first thing to giving Zamir White that workhorse role. Well, I'm calling BS. And I kind of was like ready to call BS because despite the fact that like this was the same coaching staff that closed out the year last year, when, you had Josh Jacobs injured, it was Zamir White, and it was Zamir White all the time. You had Amir Abdullah coming in for some third down work, but like when it came to actual carries, this was 100% Zamir White's role. So didn't really make a ton of sense. Now they've backed that up fully. They only took one running back in this class, 6th round, 32nd pick in the 6th round, Dylan Lobby out of New Hampshire, who I think is pretty much just going to be their receiving option. He was one of the most productive running backs in the NCAA in terms of receiving. And I think it's a great fit, right? I think Zamir White offers a lot of speed. He offers a lot in terms of first and second down upside for a team that does want to run the ball.
Yeah, there's a lot to like here. There's a lot I want to unpack. So let's start with, let's go back a little bit. We got to rewind a little bit. So last year the Raiders franchise tagged Josh Jacobs, and then they gave him basically a rework deal where he got a little bit more money than the franchise tag. Okay. At the end of the season, it became pretty clear that Jacobs wasn't going to get a long-term deal from the Raiders. So he sat out the last 4 games of the season. Now, we can debate whether how hurt he actually was, but he didn't play. And that allowed Zamir White to be the starting running back for the last 4 games of the year. Production was really good, really, really strong. And it was good. He played so well in the final month of the season that I think the front office for the Raiders and the coaching staff was like, listen, Josh, I didn't say this to Josh Jacobs, but they were saying, we really like Josh Jacobs, but we're okay with Zamir White, right? Like, we drafted White in the 4th round. Let's see what he can do as a full-time back. You knew they were going to bring in somebody else, and they signed Alexander Mattison. And if you want like the least threatening RB2 behind your RB1, that's Alexander Mattison. So like, that's great. That's something that's great for Zamir White's dynasty value. And then they didn't draft a running back until round 6, Dylan Lobby, who you mentioned. I think in an ideal world, Kate, he is the passing down back. But are they really going to trust a 6th round rookie from New Hampshire in his first year to be a passing down back? I actually think that's where Alexander Mattison is more likely to be on the field. On top of all those reasons, they drafted a tight end in round 1. They drafted Jackson Powers Johnson, who they project as a guard in round 2. They drafted an offensive tackle in round 3. This is a team that's going to want to play 12 personnel, 2 tight ends. They signed Michael Gallup, one of the best blocking receivers in the league. Antonio Pierce wants to take the air out of the football and run it. Like, they want to run the ball 30, 35 times a game. And Zamir White is in line for a ton of work this season.
Here's, I think, the biggest question mark, and I think this has probably been kind of the biggest, point of hesitancy for Zamir White, especially from a dynasty perspective, is the fact that coming out of the draft, I think he did fall because of these medical concerns, right?
Mhm.
Suffered 2 torn ACLs before he even stepped on an NFL field. So like that does project with some questions and about potential longevity issues. Is he just a one contract player? But I'm going to make the argument, I don't think that matters for Dynasty all that much. I don't think Zamir White ever projected as a multi-contract guy. You never paid up for Zamir White. I think Dynasty managers can pretty comfortably look at Zamir White as, for the coming season, a top 20 running back at the very worst. And maybe that extends into the next season. But here's the thing, even if his value is in the 2024 season alone, I think his price justifies that cost at this point. We'll see how much the ADP actually shakes up in terms of like post draft and where the dust starts to settle. But like Zamir White, RB20, I think that's like pretty decent for a 1-year rental or maybe a 2-year rental. Like,
so one of the things we always talk about, Kate, in Dynasty is that the running back position is just such a year-over-year thing. Like, we can't project forward a lot like we do at quarterback and tight end and wide receiver. So really, year 1 is the most important. The good thing about Zamir White is he still has 2 years left on his rookie deal. This is a new coaching staff, so I think they're going to get a little bit of time here. I think for at least the next 18-ish months, Zamir White projects, as you talked about, as a top 20 running back. And I'm going to go even further, okay? I think he's a top 15 running back. And I want to mention some of the running backs that are being drafted ahead of him that I just like more. Like, for example, Javonte Williams with the Broncos. Denver added our guy, Audric Estime. They signed Samaje Perine. Just give me Zamir White over Javonte Williams all day. I think the Raiders are going to have a better offense than what Denver will.
I mean, generally speaking, I'm going to say from like a prospect perspective, from an NFL player perspective, I think Javonte Williams is the better player.
Probably, but Javonte is also.
But it doesn't necessarily matter.
Yeah, and he's coming off a big knee injury. Was that 2022? Clearly didn't look the same in 2023. Even some of the other running backs that are going ahead of him, which we'll talk about in a little bit, Najee Harris, Jonathan Brooks, who is younger, so I understand that one. Like Derrick Henry, I've got some major concerns about Derrick Henry with the Ravens this year, especially with playing with Lamar Jackson. Keith Mitchell's coming back. I'm kind of all in on Zamir White. I would have no problem at all valuing him as a top 15 running back. I think we have James Cook at RB14. I'm not sure there's a big difference between those two.
I prefer James Cook in this situation, but I think that's fair. I think all of those things are fair from a draft capital perspective, from a total well-rounded perspective. I'm going to take Cook in that instance, but I do think like names like Javonte Williams, who, by the way, heading into the final year on his rookie contract with major question marks about his future. I mean, you mentioned the serious knee injury, obviously, but like never exceeded 1,000 rushing yards. I think like questioning what he might get on a second deal is more than fair at this point.
I agree.
I think pretty much all the running backs that you mentioned in that range have some major question marks. So like the question marks about health, like I think a lot of them can be kind of overridden by a really favorable situation for Zamir White that could be, one of the best values in terms of veterans at this point coming out of the draft.
I'm buying. Buy. Let's talk about a quarterback that I'm buying coming out of the draft next. This episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. You guys have talked about this so many times before, but there's just so much good stuff happening in this game that we have to tell you about it. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more that you win together, the more awesome prizes that you unlock. And there's so much to get, like unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, and hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new every single day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique machines like digging for treasure. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything that you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now on Google Play or on the App Store. Game on. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Kate, let's talk about a quarterback who we think gained value during the NFL draft. Who is it?
Got to talk about Trevor Lawrence, who I have kind of thought all offseason long, really undervalued, coming off of a disappointing season, which, mind you, injured the entire season with just a whole slew of garbage. In the 2023 season alone, knee bruise suffered in week 6, high ankle sprain, concussion, shoulder sprain. Like, this dude was tossed around like a rag doll in 2023. And I think almost like to his credit in terms of NFL, like actual NFL stuff, like the fact that he played through that myriad of injuries and came out the other side, tough dude.
He's so
but
tough. Yeah.
but in terms of like valuing him for fantasy, I think he's getting a big knock because he did play through those injuries at much less than 100%, which I think it makes a lot easier to kind of forgive some of that lack of fantasy upside. We had a lot of promise coming into this year between Calvin Ridley, between Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Travis Etienne. Like, there was so much on the board for this team. And I think, like, when I'm looking at what went wrong, a lot of it felt like health, not even just his health, Christian Kirk at the end of the season. Like,
Missed
it
a
was
whole
the
lot
perfect
last.
storm of garbage,
I
right?
think Kirk missed the final 5 games of the season, I believe.
And he was a cornerstone of this
Yeah.
offense. And I don't necessarily know that Calvin Ridley is a guy that without, a Christian Kirk opposite him, that I want him as my wide receiver 1. Like, I think Brian Thomas coming out of the draft, the Jaguars went all in to get him a receiving option with size, with speed, not the most nuanced route runner in this class or the most polished prospect, but he's got a lot of traits, tools, athleticism that I think he's going to open up the field for this team sooner rather than later. And that's going to be a huge benefit for Trevor Lawrence.
All right, so this is where I'm going to be labeled a hater, and I hope Calvin Ridley's not listening because I know he pays attention to my Twitter account, unfortunately. I kind of think if at the end of the season, right, it was, I mean, you're looking at the depth chart. It was Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, and Zay Jones, not Zay Flowers, Zay Jones. And now it's Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, and Brian Thomas. I think at the very least, that's comparable. At the very least, it's comparable. I think this is a much more explosive unit that can actually make plays down the field. For as good as Calvin Ridley is, he and Trevor Lawrence just really never clicked. It always felt clunky last year. I kind of think having somebody with Brian Thomas's size and speed is going to fit this offense better because Christian Kirk can do a lot of the underneath stuff as well as Evan Ingram. But now you get 2 height, weight, speed guys on the outside in Davis and Brian Thomas. And I just think this offense to me, it seems like it's going to fit much better. We'll see how Brian Thomas does from a fantasy perspective, but Trevor Lawrence right now, Kate, is being drafted as QB 15 in dynasty leagues, and I think that's insane. That is far, far too low for me.
Well, let's go through the exercise of some quarterbacks. I'm going to name a name, and you tell me, would you prefer that player or would you prefer Trevor Lawrence? So let's start relatively on the high end of things. Anthony Richardson, QB7 right now in
I'll
terms
go
of dynasties.
Richardson.
Okay. Jordan Love, QB8.
Love.
Justin Herbert, QB9.
Lawrence.
Okay. What gives you the tiebreaker there?
I just think that the Jags are going to throw the ball a lot more than what the Chargers are. I mean, I love Justin Herbert, but Herbert really isn't giving them anything on the ground. And if we're going to talk about injury stuff, Lawrence has actually been able to stay on the field, where I do worry a little bit about Herbert's durability.
All right. Kyler Murray, QB10.
Oh, Lawrence easy. And I love Kyler. Lawrence easy.
Caleb Williams.
Caleb.
Dak Prescott.
Lawrence.
All right. So I think, like, obviously there's some mishmash in here, but I think you're valuing him closer to QB10 than QB15.
Yes.
And I think all of those things are justified. I think the fact that, like, even on its own, I'm kind of looking, and I'm not saying that Calvin Ridley and Gabe Davis are the same players, but like they're going to serve a similar function in that offense. I think having him along with Christian Kirk, along with Evan Ingram, like that on face value, I was like, all right, kind of a 1-for-1 situation. Brian Thomas is the guy that sets that offense totally apart with that speed element that I think just so sorely needed. But to have two true options on the outside, which Christian Kirk can play in the middle, he can rotate to the outside as needed. But like they suddenly have, I think, a much more diverse skill set than they entered the 2023 season with. And I think all in all, that's just going to open things up from a playbook standpoint. That's going to so benefit Trevor Lawrence. Like, let's not forget, the safety that we're going to have in Trevor Lawrence as the former number 1 overall pick. Like, this dude could make a million mistakes and he's probably still going to stick around just from a prospect perspective, from a draft capital perspective. And that's not even mentioning all of the flashes that we've seen throughout his career to this point. I think Trevor Lawrence is a big time buy. Capitalize on that lack of momentum here and improve your dynasty roster.
We should mention he's only 24, Kate. And there's been so much up and down with the coaching staff that he has as a rookie, and then the injury last year. I'm betting on the talent. I think this is the year.
It's very easy to forget he's 24.
Exactly. There's quarterbacks in this draft that were selected with the 8th overall pick that are older than Trevor Lawrence. So I'm gonna bet on the age here. I want to talk about another running back that you believe had a big increase in their dynasty value this weekend. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and in the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. I can't wait for this Timberwolves Nuggets series. I think it's going to be electric. I know the Nuggets are big favorites right now, but I kind of like the T-Wolves and Anthony Edwards as underdogs in this one. Should be a lot of fun. So go visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are discussing veterans that increase their value over draft weekend. And Kate, you have a certain running back from maybe your favorite team that you think added value.
Not to be a homer or anything, but I feel like this is probably one of the most underrated narratives coming out of the draft, because there's no question that the Steelers absolutely dominated, right? And what they've done over the past year to rebuild this offensive line, which was just in shambles. You had a left tackle and a center that combined for over 90 pressures allowed over the course of the season. Like, this was not a suitable situation for anything. And because of the issues in pass protection, because of the lack of threat in the passing game, I do think that from a tape perspective, this was Najee Harris's best season by far. A big issue with him throughout his career has been a lack of vision. Like, the vision is not necessarily translated to the professional level coming out of Alabama. But this past season, I actually think like a huge jump in terms of his ability to read blocks whenever they actually were there, ability to see holes and make better decisions in terms of picking a run lane and sticking to it. Like, you saw the toughness, you've seen the workhorse ability. And now this team has come out and made massive investments on the offensive line. You come out, Troy Fatano, you have Mason Cole's out at center. You now have Zach Frazier coming out of WVU. Like, you have, Isaac Samalo at left guard, who they pursued in free agency last year. You have Broderick Jones, a first round pick in 2023. Like, 4 out of the 5 starters on this offensive line were not in place 2 seasons ago. And I think that that's a testament to what this team wants to do. It's to run the dang football. They come out, they draft a wide receiver in round 3 in Roman Wilson. One of the things they love about him is his ability and willingness and fierceness as a blocker. Like, everything they are doing screams run the dang ball. And I just look at the potential for this, maybe increased efficiency thanks to the offensive line. I'm looking at their upgraded quarterback, and I'm thinking, I think that there's a bigger threat in terms of passing viability for this Pittsburgh Steelers offense heading into 2024. They still could be in the market for a splash trade at wide receiver to even bolster that threat further. I just think we're about to see Najee Harris's most efficient season yet. And I mean, Marcus, to this point, like, he's been one of the highest volume running backs in the National Football League throughout his 3 seasons. Either he's going to be heading into this year. We don't have the 5th year option yet. That is due on May 2nd. So either he is going to be heading into this situation as a pending free agent in the 2025 season, or he's playing on a 5th year option, which it's either a contract year for him or you have another 2 years of safety within this Pittsburgh Steelers offense. I think that's kind of ideal. I'm just like, I think this is so great for Najee Harris.
Can I give you my only real concern?
Yeah.
What if I think just Jaylen Warren is a better fit in the wide zone Arthur Smith offense? Because in this offense, it really requires you to be able to read your blocks and then get up the field quickly. And I'm not doubting that Najee can't do this, but I do wonder if this better fits Jaylen Warren. And I think just that's my concern overall, that I think Warren is a legitimate good NFL player who's going to take, I mean, he's obviously going to take touches, but is he going to take enough touches to make Najee not fantasy irrelevant, but annoying?
Here's the thing about that is we actually saw, Jaylen Warren kind of start to creep into that annoyingness territory last season. But what I think you're going to maybe lack in volume, maybe see a decrease in that overall touch volume. I do think those touches have a chance to be much more efficient in this 2024 season, which scares me a lot less from a volume perspective. And honestly, Marcus, like, obviously this is a new offensive scheme. We'll see how it plays out. But Jaylen Warren kind of put them in some precarious situations towards the end of the season with ball security issues. Like, Najee Harris always going to be the goal line guy for this team. So those valuable touches inside the 5, inside the red zone, I think belong to Najee Harris. Volume, like, Jaylen Warren might be annoying because you might not be getting 20 to 25 touches per game. But I also think that there's going to be enough efficiency here for Najee Harris, given the situation, given the changes they've implemented in the offense, to make it a non-issue. And you're looking at Najee Harris in terms of his dynasty value right now. And I do think like he's not a sexy name, right? Like he's RB19, which is just one spot ahead of Zamir White, who we talked
Well, I was
about.
going to ask you, would you rather have Najee or Zamir?
Najee, easily.
Oh, see,
And
I think it's Zamir. I think, wait, hold on. I think that we can come up with some kind of little wager here about total fantasy points scored during the 2024 season. Is that fair?
well, I think that's totally fair. But also, like from a dynasty perspective, Marcus, you're talking about a first round running back who
I get it.
much, much, much safer in terms of long term value than a guy like Zamir White, who, you know, we can say maybe concerns about him being a one contract player. Like, yeah, I'm going to go with Najee Harris over.
Listen, I agree with almost everything you're saying. I just look at, I guess I look at Zamir White, and I think the next 2 years for Zamir, I think I have more confidence in what his role is going to be than maybe I do with Najee. But we'll see. I think those guys are very, very close to each other. I'm very interested to see how Najee fits this new Arthur Smith offense, because I do think there's a chance that he fits it very, very well. And maybe we see Jaylen Warren go back to more of a complementary role rather than a two-headed monster type of situation in Pittsburgh.
I mean, let's not forget toward the end of last season, heading into the, like that was Najee Harris, like from a volume perspective in the second half of last season, really took over that offense. And it did coincide with these moments where Jaylen Warren kind of screwed things up.
Yeah,
And I think he lost a little bit of trust last year. And that's not to say he's not a great player. He is the more efficient player. I love him as a Pittsburgh Steeler, but I think the Steelers want Najee Harris to be the guy.
All right, so just to recap, Zamir White, Trevor Lawrence, Najee Harris are three biggest veteran winners coming out of the NFL draft. On tomorrow's show, we're going to be discussing the players that lost value, the vets that lost value out of the draft, and there were several that we're going to discuss. So make sure you tune in tomorrow for that. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Dynasty. Go follow Kate at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here on Friday.